Hello and welcome to Newswatch with me, Samira Ahmed. Coming up, as more and more people use social media as their primary source of news, how well is BBC journalism doing in this new world? And were this week's reports about pensioners being better off than those of working age misleading and divisive? First, the ongoing tension between Donald Trump and the media broke out into open hostilities again this week. At a news conference on Thursday, the BBC's John Sopel had this encounter with the president.
Where are you from?
BBC.
Okay. Here's another beauty.
It's a good line. Impartial, free and fair.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. President.
Just like CNN, right?
On the travel ban, we could banter back and forth. On the travel ban, would you accept that that was a good example of the smooth running of government?
Yeah, I do. Let me tell you about the travel.
Were there any mistakes in that?
Wait. I know who you are. Just wait.
Spiky exchanges of that kind seem likely to continue and will doubtless be examining the BBC's relationship with the White House again soon. But for now, let's leave it with a couple of comments posted after that news conference. One Twitter user thought, John Sopel's backchat to President Trump was utterly distasteful and warrants an apology. #unprofessional. But rather more felt like these viewers. John Sopel was a class act. Trump showed himself to be an unhinged, sarcastic, stupid bully. Bravo, John. And Penny Paisley agreed it was a victory on points for the BBC's North America editor. Trump 0, Sopel 1. Superb, far more professional than the guy behind the lectern. The phenomenon of items on news bulletins being used to trail forthcoming BBC current affairs programmes has been noted many times on Newswatch. Does this practice simply make the most of the BBC's journalism across its output, or are these just plugs disguised as news? Tony Francis thought 2 examples on the news at 6 at the start of this week fell into the latter category.
On Monday, the first headline was the fact the prisons are in crisis. And then the newsreader went on to say that there was a panorama programme later that evening showing all the drama. And second item on the BBC News at 6 o'clock was the fact that a supermarket has been keeping special offers open for months at a time. And guess what? There was to be another BBC programme at 7:30 to do with this topic. Seems to me the BBC is not reporting news at all. It is actually making its news, or trying to. And at the same time, just simply a matter of promoting their own programmes. This isn't what news seems to me to be about.
Monday saw a number of complaints about a story which featured across several bulletins and services, including the News at 1, introduced here by Sophie Rayworth.
Pensioners are on average better off than those of working age for the first time. That's according to new research by the think tank, the Resolution Foundation. It says a new wave of pensioners are more likely than previous generations to own their home, have generous private pensions and still be working.
Not mentioned in that introduction, though it was in the report that followed, was that the calculation made by the Resolution Foundation was based on household income after housing costs such as rent or mortgage. The BBC's own reality check on the news website said that this important factor had been mentioned little in the coverage. It found that before housing costs are taken into account, working age households still have higher incomes. A number of older viewers felt that both the top-line claim of the story, that pensioners are better off than workers, and the way that the statistics were reported was unbalanced. Wyn Merrills put it with some sarcasm in his email. It appears that people at the end of their careers are better off than those at the start. The facts seem to suggest that those who have worked, paid off their mortgages, saved and paid into public and occupational pension schemes have greater resources than those who have yet to do so. How can this happen? We need to be told. Now, on Thursday, the Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg told the BBC that fake news had damaged public debate following criticism that his site hadn't done enough to prevent made-up or distorted stories from appearing on its news feed. The BBC has an interest in Facebook's reputation as it's increasingly using it as a platform for its own journalism. It's part of a strategy of embracing new digital technologies and social media, a revolution in how the BBC reaches its audience. Once upon a time, BBC News had only two means of broadcasting, radio and television. But now it's faced with a fast increasing number of ways in which to reach audiences. There's Twitter, where the BBC's breaking news account has almost 30 million followers. Instagram, where more than 3 million people follow BBC News. And of course, Facebook, where the corporation has the largest page of any news organisation in the world.
Hello, welcome to our Facebook Live.
In addition, it started streaming some of its output via Facebook Live, as well as other live streaming apps such as Periscope.
I'm live here.
But has all this activity left some traditional licence fee paying members of the audience behind? Penelope Noel thinks so, emailing us to say, the focus on digital media discriminates against the very many people who are unable to afford or use digital devices. Stories like the investigation earlier this month into wildlife traffickers selling baby chimpanzees are now rolled out in carefully targeted ways to different digital destinations, attracting significant traffic on a variety of platforms. The benefit of this strategy for BBC News is obvious in capturing hard-to-reach younger audiences where they're already spending their time online. But there are dangers too. Facebook, for instance, has faced mounting criticism for publishing fake news. So how does the BBC avoid being seen as just another potentially unreliable news source? And does its presence on the site risk giving away its content without bringing people back to spend time on the BBC's core services? Well, let's explore those questions with the social media editor for BBC News, Mark Frenkel. Welcome to Newswatch, Mark. How important are social media platforms like Facebook to BBC News now?
They're extremely important. I mean, I think one of the things we have to realise about Facebook is it controls and manages a huge proportion of the social web. Facebook owns Instagram, it owns WhatsApp, it owns Facebook Messenger. There are 1.9 billion monthly active users on Facebook. So for the BBC not to be producing content and distributing it onto Facebook would be a huge loss. It would be a loss for our audiences that inhabit those spaces and want to explore more of our content and see and engage and enrich themselves with the information that we produce there.
They don't pay a licence fee, certainly Facebook doesn't. What's the deal that the BBC has then with them for providing all this content?
Well, Facebook is an open platform and there is nothing to stop any publisher from producing content and distributing it onto their platform. We have an arrangement with Facebook in that we produce content for live streaming on a regular basis. Outside of that, we're publishing regular content all the time onto Facebook. Links to articles from the BBC News website, videos that we're producing across BBC News, and we will continue to do that.
As we know, Facebook has this real problem with fake news, and one wonders if there isn't just a danger that the BBC is just another provider on there, and a lot of the audience don't notice or care if it's reliable or not. They're just looking for the story, and the BBC doesn't really get a positive benefit from that.
Well, I think this is all about our values and what's right for our audiences. And we're not compromising anything in terms of BBC values, objectivity, impartiality by producing content and publishing it onto Facebook. Clearly, the content that we're producing and publishing into that space is alongside lots of other content. We can't vouch for the authenticity, the veracity of other people's content, but what we can do is vouch for our own. And the more content that we produce into that space that people see, the more they will learn to understand and trust and value the BBC and see it relevant to their lives and the things that matter in their lives. What we're learning all the time here is how to produce content in a valuable way for an audience on social media, and it isn't just a question of taking a television package and sticking it into a Facebook page. You have to think about how your audience will come to it, see it, engage with it, look to share it and so forth. So you're having to retailer, repurpose, reposition, think about the visuals, think about the impact, think about the text that you're putting at the top of the piece and so forth.
But also, we get a lot of complaints at Newswatch that BBC News has become too obsessed with celebrity. Is there a danger, of trying to give social media what it wants, which might be a preoccupation with stories that really aren't very serious, and that's affecting the news content that's produced under the BBC's banner?
I think all the time the preoccupation that I have and the colleagues that work with me in social media at the BBC have is giving our audiences things that are editorially valuable and interesting, but at the same time will be the kind of things that we know that will interest them from a social media perspective. So it's not about dumbing down or abandoning your serious news values. It's about saying, we've got a really important story here about Syria, or we've got an important story about the American election, or whatever the story happens to be at any moment in time, and thinking, how can we make that interesting for someone who might be coming to that story for the first time on a social media feed or platform?
It can seem sometimes as though social media isn't operating under the same editorial guidelines as the rest of the BBC. How far are there guidelines about how you write for social media which are different or similar to the traditional BBC News editorial guidelines?
So we have a lot of guidelines and we have a lot of editorial thought that's gone into them, and we have very rigorous compliance processes as well. To my mind, social media is another form of broadcasting. It's not a marketing exercise. It's not an additional sort of process that we sort of join onto the end of a television programme. This is serious business for us. We really want to reach and engage those audiences. We want to encourage them to explore more of the content that we're producing, but we need to take it seriously. And just as a television programme, if you were writing a script for the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news, you would write the first draft, somebody else would look over it, there would be a process by which that script would then get approved and onto air. Exactly the same processes take place with our social media writing too.
Mark Frankel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your comments this week. If you want to share your opinions on BBC News and current affairs, or even appear on the programme, you can call us on 0370 010 6676 or email newswatch@bbc.co.uk. You can find us on Twitter @NewsWatchBBC, and do have a look at our website. The address for that is bbc.co.uk/newswatch. That's all from us. We'll be back to hear your thoughts about BBC News coverage again next week. Goodbye.